Okay, welcome. This is the first chapter in our journey here. The way it works is I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to go through the stuff in the book. By the way, mine's the instructor edition, so it may look a little different than yours. What I do is I prepare myself some lecture notes. These are just my notes to me to make sure we talk about topics that are important, and I'm going to be calling out things that are important and calling out page numbers for you to look at. So essentially, you need to watch the video, have the book handy, and pay attention and take notes. Cool? Okay. Well, let's begin. So, Chapter 1 is Introduction to Project Management, and it's on page 1 in the book. Yay! So, the first thing we're going to do is just talk about the learning objectives. I always like to go through these because it just kind of sort of sets the tone for what this chapter is going to be. So, understand the growing need for better project management. Explain what a project is. Describe project management key elements. Discuss the relationship between a project program and a portfolio. Understand the role of project managers and describe project management profession, including its history and all the rest of that stuff. So those are our learning objectives for this coin. So starting on page 2, they talk about the introduction. So in the book, they talk about how historically, project management was used only by like top managers and, for very large projects. And they were all about, scheduling and resources. And it stayed that way for quite some time until people realized that, you don't have to be building a bridge or building a house to use project management. You can do it for practically anything, to include, in our case, software projects. So the whole idea is they've opened this whole process up so that practically anyone can use these tools. Okay, the next thing you talk about is an awful lot of automated tools now that weren't available back then. Back then you had a Gantt chart. We'll talk about what that is. A Gantt chart, they would show a timeline and a series of things, and it was a very good tool for communicating what the requirements are and all the resources and all the rest of that stuff. But they've automated all that stuff now. So it's pretty doggone easy to go in and have a hiccup and scoot things around and do all that kind of good stuff. There's some cool statistics there on page 2 and 3. I'm not going to go through them all, but a couple of them that are kind of cool that you probably need to be kind of paying attention to is, the unemployment rate for people in the IT profession is about half of other professions. So that's good news for IT folks. They talk about the average salary of somebody who is a project manager, does project management for a living, is about $108,000 a year. That's pretty good money. And then talk about how about 80% of those people have a certification, a project management professional, a PMP. Of course, I always call it PIMP, but I suspect they probably wouldn't appreciate that. By the way, this textbook is written kind of sort of as a certification guide for getting one of these certifications. So it covers all of their 10 domains of things that they want to talk about that's going to show up in their certification exam. And we'll talk about that again in just a little bit more. So one of the cool things about this book, I like this book, is they have these little sections off to the side, a little green section that says, why did this work, or how come this didn't work? Well, the what went wrong section on page 3 is an excellent one. It's a cool little story. You probably need to kind of pause the video and read that. But it basically talks about in 1995, they did a survey of a bunch of folks talking about projects. And they basically concluded that, IT project success rate was about 16%. Yeah, 16%. Now, their measure for determining whether or not a project was successful included, was it on time, was it in budget, and those kinds of things. So basically what they're saying is we did a horrible job of estimating the resources and time and project scope and quality requirements. So we just kind of did projects and they just kind of sort of did their own thing. So it's kind of an indictment on not using project management tools. They also talk about how 31% of the projects were just canceled. They took too long, they weren't getting anywhere, and they finally just said, to heck, we're just gonna stop this project and move on. So do read that little section. It's pretty doggone cool. A lot of stuff in there. The next thing you talk about is, okay, no, so that's the bad news story. The good news story is, what are the advantages of using this whole project management approach, which is kind of what we're doing here. So here's their little bullet list on page 4. Yeah, it provides you much better control on the resources. Without project management, if somebody had said, well, how long is that project going to take? You'd go, I don't know. How much is it going to cost? I don't know. So yeah, you need good controls on how much is it going to cost, how many people are you going to need, and all the rest of the stuff. Customer relations. It's not good to have a successful project and then when you're done, the customer doesn't like it. Well, I fulfilled all the requirements. See, it was on time and it was under budget and it met all these quality requirements. I've fulfilled my promise to you. Yeah, but your product sucks. So yeah, customer relations is a good key point to this. Shorter development times, in theory, if you've got these things all scheduled and got all the moving parts, you can actually scrunch the schedule together. Lower cost, obviously, same reason. Higher quality and increased reliability. And of course, the business people are going to be concerned about higher profit margins and improved productivity. In better internal coordination, yep. And then, of course, higher worker morale, which is actually pretty doggone cool. Okay, so on page 4, they talk about what is a project. Now, remember, I don't really care that much about definitions, so I'm going to go through the definition because you need to know this stuff. But I'm not going to have a test question that says, what's the definition of project management? Okay, hopefully you've gone through the other introductory videos by now. Okay, good. So, the definition of a project: a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product or service, and blah, 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 blah. They make a distinction between a project, which is kind of a temporary thing, and operations. So operations is the work it takes to sustain a project going or a process, right? So projects are temporary, a huge boost in activity, and then we're done. Project is done. And then you switch over to operating, which hopefully would be, significantly less number of people involved and all the rest of that stuff. So I project. There's some really cool examples there. There's a bullet list on page 4 and 5 of some really cool examples. I'm gonna crack open the book and just look at a couple of them because they're kind of cool. I can get my section there. So I'm not going to read them all, obviously, but they talk about, a large network of healthcare providers updates its information systems. A team of students create a smartphone application and sell it online. Company develops a driverless car, blah, 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 blah. Those are all projects that somebody's got, where somebody's in charge and they're doing stuff. Down in the middle of that page, they talk about what I would call disruptive technologies, the things that have happened somewhat recently that kind of set the stage for either the success or failure. And they talk about computing everywhere. In the old days, only the rich people had computers, and the saturation of computers in a household was relatively low. And of course, the internet explodes. And now everyone carries a computer around, in their pants pocket or purse. But so computing everywhere, the Internet of Things. That's another good one. Essentially, if I'm making toasters or microwaves or refrigerators, somebody's going to be wanting to put internet connectivity on there. It's going to happen. So the Internet of Things. Okay, I was poking fun a little bit, but you know what I'm talking about. Thermostats and alarm systems for houses and lots of things that you can connect to the internet that previously we did not. 3D printing, kind of cool. I've got a 3D printer. I use it just for goofing off. I don't actually produce things much, just having fun. And then analytics, data analytics. There's entire companies out there that do this for living. If you were to ask, for example, where does Google get all its money? I mean, they don't charge for anything. They don't charge to use their search engine. They don't charge for, Google Chrome. They don't charge for anything. So how the heck do they make money? Well, they make money through advertising. And why they're so very good at advertising is they collect tons and tons and tons of data. Huge amount of data. even to the point where it takes a different sets of technologies, the big data movement, you've probably heard those phrases, where it takes different sets of tools to be able to analyze this stuff. So data analytics is a big, big business. Okay, so let's continue. On page 6, they talk about the project attributes. So every project should have, project attributes. So every project should have a unique purpose. That kind of makes sense. They really ought not have two projects that are both trying to do the same thing. For example, I don't want to have this project says, okay, we're going to increase our sales by 10% by next June, and this one says, okay, we're going to increase our sales by 10% by next June. We're running them both at the same time. They need to be unique. Okay, you can't have two projects both trying to accomplish the same thing necessarily. So unique purpose. Another defining characteristic, it was even in the definition, is it's temporary. So projects are not long-term things that go on forever, although if you've ever been in one of these things, they seem like they go on forever. Okay, the other one uses progressive elaboration. I think that's a really cool term. What they're basically trying to say is, we don't know everything when we start the project. And so we have to just continuously ask over and over and over. And we get more information and we collaborate more. Think of the example of, I'm building a house for the first time. So some young couple comes into the contractors and says, oh, we'd like to build a new house. And they're not going to be able to tell them, what kind of brick they want and what kind of wallpaper and colors they want and paint. They're not going to have all that detail the first day. But as they go through, they'll bring them in and say, okay, now it's time to pick the brick. Okay, now it's time to pick the wallpaper. Now it's time to pick the paint colors. They do this in a progression rather than boom, here, answer this survey. No, it doesn't work that way. So another attribute is they require resources, and most often the resources are probably both those that you're in control of, like you're an IT staff and you have your own people, plus lots and lots of other people outside of your organization. And they really need a primary customer or a sponsor, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. You got to have a discrete customer. You can't just say the company. You really need somebody to be the champion. Some bigwig in the organization says, I want this project. And that provides you that sponsorship. Because otherwise, you're going to call up some organization, hey, I need to spend 20 minutes of your time to work on this project. They're going to say, no. Clunk. You need a sponsor that says, this is important by God. I want you guys to pay attention. That kind of stuff. So you need a sponsor, or at least a primary customer. And then one of the things that they talk about in here is that all projects have a certain degree of uncertainty. That when you start a project, you do not know everything, okay? You do not know how long it's going to take for sure. So you build in a model of how long you think it's going to take and how much resources you think it's going to take, and then you work from there. But you don't ever assume, okay, I know exactly what this is going to take. Okay, building a house, the contractor might say, we typically build a house in 90 days. Great. So then there's a storm that comes in and it rains for 2 weeks. Are you still going to get your house in 90 days? Probably not. Though, yeah, there's a great deal of uncertainty. The next thing I talk about is the project constraints. I love the little triangle thing. I love this little thing. It says, you can have it when you want something. It can be good, fast, or cheap. Pick any two. You can't have all three. It can either be good and cheap, but it ain't going to be fast, or fast and good, but it ain't going to be cheap. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark, so we're going to pause this and pick us up again in just a few.